movie I am going to recommend that you guys should see. It's actually not a movie; it's a series. Is Dem season 2. If you haven't seen season 1, you should watch season 1. But season 2, really, really good. I'm on actually the last episode. So I haven't finished it yet, but I'm on the last episode. Season 1 is about a black family moving out of their old home, because in their old home there was a racial attack that happened that left their babies, like their son, dead, and then they ended up moving to a new area. They were still racism, but it wasn't as bad as, I think, the last area they were in was Mississippi. I'm not too sure, I don't want to make it up, but the new area is a nice area. Before, they were living like in the country, but this time they're moving in actual, like, not the country. And it links to some ancestral type of voodoo-ish, where they kind of get slowly engulfed in like their anger and obviously the past, and it's got a lot to do with their ancestors, a lot to do with obviously racism, and a lot to do with how that comes into fruition. In season 2, this is now in the 90s, based in the 90s, but this one based on police detective, this serial killer, well, a suspected serial killer in the neighborhood, in the black community. The way that the killings happen is crazy. So then now it's linked to more kind of like paranormal, and how it links to like generational curse in a way. So it's really good. I recommend it.
I did watch Heretic a few months back, and I don't think I mentioned it as a best recent thing watched. And I can't remember if it came out this year or last year. I think it was like maybe early this year or last year, or whatever. My recollection of it isn't perfect, but I do remember watching it on a flight, and I was like, this is quite interesting. I actually quite like the concept of it. Good characters, good dynamic between the people in this movie. Really small cast. I think it was one that I had seen, and it was just like an interesting premise because it had sort of the whole background of religion and things like that. And I just kind of wanted to see how they tackle the subject. To my best recollection, I thought they handled it quite well. I actually think I quite enjoyed the movie. So not one that I watched recently, but one I watched in the past couple of months, and I think it's worth a watch for sure. I did enjoy myself when I was watching that movie.
That is one where I'm glad we didn't talk about it, because like this whole debate of science versus religion or reason versus faith and all of that, I think that's really interesting, and there's some really interesting conversations to be had. But almost like movies almost never go there. They almost never have anything interesting to say, and they can almost never honestly present both sides of this and kind of honestly represent what the actual debate is and where people are coming from when it comes to that. So for that reason, I kind of stepped around it and kind of didn't touch it. But if it's good, then I might check it out. So I watched season 1 of Mid-Century Modern, which is a 2025 sitcom about these three middle-aged gay men who, after one of their friend dies, kind of reassess their lives, and they decide to make a change, and that involves moving in together as roommates. And then sitcom plots kind of happen, and a lot of them are kind of based around being kind of gay in your 50s and various aspects. Like one character is like a Mormon who loves the church, and the church doesn't reciprocate, and they kicked him out when he came out. There's another one who is kind of struggling with kind of no longer being as young as he used to be. Things like that, right? So there's all sorts of different plot lines here that are kind of equal parts sitcom silliness and quite crude in its humor as well, and also fairly heavy topics. So first of all, it's just intelligent, well written. If it was just a bunch of gay jokes, I would not really enjoy it. And there's a bunch of tropes in this that I kind of find tedious, but the humor itself is fairly intelligent and it's like an intelligent crudeness, or like it's smart dumb, in the sense that it's a dumb joke, but a lot of thought went into constructing it. And then the other half is fairly heavy drama. So one example is that there's an actress in the cast who plays the mother of one of the main characters, and the actress died halfway into making the season. And so they retooled 2 episodes to kind of make it a eulogy for her, where they kill off the mom as a character, and then there's a funeral and there's a grieving process, and that is kind of a tribute to the actress who actually died. And the entire thing is very heavy, very heartfelt, very, very intelligent, very emotional. And each of these individual pieces should not be my thing, but it's probably one of the smarter and more sincere comedy dramas, just stories that I've seen come out in like this year, at least in the last 2 years. Also notably, one of my not so much pet peeves, but questions is why no movies and no shows are acknowledging that the pandemic happened. And this has an episode in which they all test positive for COVID. And so they are stuck in their house for an episode while they kind of wait out the quarantine or the self quarantine. And that is basically a bottle episode where it's just three people, sitting on a couch, feeling sorry for themselves and kind of just acting. And I think this is it's not the first time I've seen a COVID plot, but I can count them on one hand. And that was kind of interesting that the show just went there. And it doesn't say anything big. It's just a reality that sometimes you just get COVID and you just have to stay home for a week. It might be the second or third time I've seen a show acknowledge this reality. And it's interesting. Like, it wasn't just about that. It was like, it forced three characters who didn't want to be in the same room to be in the same room, right? Like, that's the setup. But I kind of perked up a little bit the way they mentioned COVID. And I'm not used to movies doing that or shows doing that. And the show is not good because of that, but it's like stuff like this where I said, oh, this is a little bit more thoughtful, a little bit smarter than I would expect out of like a silly sitcom. I did catch the first episode of The Institute, which is an adaptation of a Stephen King novel. I have a really hard time liking current stuff, just for whatever reason. Kind of the tone and feel of most things that are made at the moment is just not my thing. I just don't enjoy it in most cases. And also, Stephen King is kind of a mixed bag for me. There's a few things I like from him, but most things of his is just not my thing. Just his stock characters and like his themes and tone, generally not my kind of horror. But The Institute is actually quite good. So the story is essentially that there is this 15, 16-year-old genius who is about to head off to MIT because he's this math prodigy. One night he gets abducted from his bed and wakes up at the Institute. He is told that he is one of very few people who have telekinetic powers, and that he is there to learn how to use these powers and then do something that is essential for the survival of the world. And basically, this institute kidnaps children who have these abilities and runs them through this program. And then when they're done with the program, their mind is wiped and they are returned to their families, and they can live out the rest of their lives. But they have to fulfill this term of service, essentially. The first episode is free to stream. The rest is behind a paywall. And you need an MGM Plus subscription to see it. So I've just seen the first episode so far, but I'm definitely going to watch it in August when it's all out. And the first episode was just a good time. It's well acted, well written, avoids a whole bunch of easy cliches. It's just a good watch, and just had a good time and made me want to see more and made me want to learn what the mystery of the Institute is. So that was a pleasant surprise, and that's my recommendation for the week, even though I don't know how it ends. Like, normally I don't like to recommend things if I haven't seen the ending, because the ending is like often where it falls flat. So this might very well be the case, but like the first episode was just so convincing that I think it's a safe recommendation.
I watched is Your Friends and Neighbours. I believe that's what it's called. That is a really, really good series. It's about a guy that ends up getting fired from, I think he used to work in like some hedge fund type of company, and he ends up getting fired, kind of like set up in a way. And then he ends up becoming a thief, as in like literally he ends up robbing his friends, because obviously the community that they live in, there's hardly any crime. So he just ends up robbing them at night time, obviously when they're not there, steals their possessions, and then he ends up getting into like sticky situations in the future throughout the series. And yeah, it's just, I can't lie, this one is a fun watch. And I think this is what people refer to when they say Apple has like really, really high quality good stuff. Because I've always thought, not always, I like quite a few of Apple TV shows and movies. However, I feel like with Apple, their series are very, very slow. So I have kind of like mixed feelings when it comes to them. But when they have but for the good stuff, like the really good stuff, like shout out to C, that's a really good series as well if you haven't seen it. But when you watch their good stuff is really, really good. It's called Your Friends and Neighbours. Yes, I would definitely recommend for you guys to go. That one is funny. It's great story. This might go down as one of my favorites when it comes to just that whole genre, dark comedy. I think I'm gonna become a dark comedy fan now.
So the best thing I watched last week was The Last Emperor. I'd seen this movie before a few times, but not in a long time. It's a 1987 biographical epic about the life of the last emperor of China. So it starts in 1908 or so, where Puyi is crowned emperor of China at age 2, and things go downhill from there for him. So the movie essentially follows his life as he grows up in the Forbidden City and how he, as the Emperor of China, experiences Chinese history for the next 50 years. So he experiences the fall of the imperial system, the military coups, the warlord era, the republic, the communist takeover, the invasion of Japan, like everything that happened in Chinese history between the 1910s and 1960s, he kind of experienced and is kind of reflected in his life. Like he becomes a Japanese puppet at one point, and he has like an English mentor who influences him and kind of shapes his view of the world. And it very much follows like the broad strokes of the lives of this person who was kind of at the center of Chinese history for half a century. And he kind of ended up a gardener in a communist country, kind of sweeping the streets of the city that he used to own as an emperor, essentially. I think it won something like 8 Oscars or something like that. It's a very celebrated movie. I think it does hold up as a historical epic. What it doesn't do so well is actually tell the story of Puyi's life, because if you actually read up on that, it's much more complex and it's much more fascinating, and it's much darker than the movie portrays it, but it kind of gets the highlights right. But what it actually shows is the ups and downs, mostly downs, of Chinese history in the first half of the 20th century, and how, like, all the changes that it went through, and all the different revolutions and wars and takeovers and struggles and reforms, and how society completely changed several times over the course of a lifetime. I think it does a good job portraying that. It's got some hokey acting in it. There's a bunch of Chinese actors whose English is not amazing, and that kind of drags down the feel of the movie a little bit. A lot of the shot, like the cinematography, is a little bit basic, but like this was shot in the 80s as China was just beginning to open up after having closed its doors to the world for decades. And this was one of the first movies that was actually shot on location in these places and had a lot of access and a lot of resources to kind of make this part of history come to life. And it's a really interesting watch. It's not the be all and end all if you want to learn about Chinese history, but it's quite good as a movie, as a drama, as a personal journey of this person who was born into this impossible situation and kept being the plaything of history in some ways. It's the kind of movie that does not get made very often anymore. It seems like that kind of the attitude that went into making this history come to life is not really something that's done very often these days. And so it kind of feels like out of a different world when you watch it a little bit. So for that reason, I recommend it.
No, I mean, it definitely sounds very interesting. And as someone that doesn't read up too much on history, I do like historical pieces. I do like historical movies and stuff. So definitely one that I'll add to my list. Quick question. Is it a Chinese production or Hollywood production?
It's an Italian director, and I'm not sure who produced it, but it's basically a Western production that essentially got permission and access from the Chinese government in the 80s. A lot of people seem to kind of write it off as like a propaganda piece or something like that. Basically, like if this was allowed to be made, surely it has to portray the communist regime in a positive light. And it doesn't really. I think it's pretty nuanced about it. Much of it is spent in a prison camp where Puyi is being reformed into being a good communist. You know, it's kind of makes everybody look bad, right? The imperial system is cruel and arbitrary and decadent. The Republican era was dysfunctional and corrupt and brutal. The Japanese were not very nice either. And then when the communists come around, the movie actually kind of makes a point that not much has changed. Like there are scenes that kind of parallel earlier scenes. Like if you were to make like communist propaganda, you would do it completely differently. I think this movie is decently honest, but it kind of puts a lot of punches. Like when you read up on what things were actually like, it's like it does not really show all the true horrors of that history. It kind of skirts around them a little bit. The best thing I watched this week is the Drew Carey show. So I have kind of a almost 30-year history with this show. When I was growing up, it was one of those sitcoms that was in syndication. I would just see an episode and it would come up and I would watch random episodes. And then every couple of years, every 4 to 5 years, I go on this binge where I watch all 9 seasons of it. And it just never gets old. Like it just does not age badly. The first season came out in 1995, ran for 9 seasons, so it concluded in 2004. So he's basically one of these comedians who get a sitcom for themselves, and basically play like a heightened version of themselves. And then, there's wacky characters and the usual sitcom stuff. The basic premise of it is that Drew Carey is like a director of personnel at this mediocre department store in Cleveland. And he has these working class friends. So he's technically management, but he's like at the bottom level of management. So he doesn't have any actually real power. And so all his friends are kind of working class. And he kind of is stuck between those two worlds a lot of the time. And then plots tend to revolve around that a little bit. It's just a very smart and funny and creative sitcom. Just even watching it like almost 30 years later, it's still very funny. It's still very well written. It jumps the shark occasionally, where it will just go to weird places for just a moment, and then it will come back, and then it's kind of like a working class sitcom kind of thing that they don't really make anymore as well. So it's a blast from the past in more ways than one, and it's just good, right? Like beyond anything else, it's just a good comedy, a good sitcom where you can just watch any random episode and be entertained and have a good time with it. So for that reason, that's my recommendation this week. The best thing I watched this week is Mr. Belvedere, which is a 1985 sitcom. Now, I'd seen a whole bunch of episodes of this as I was growing up. It kind of ran on reruns in Germany in the 90s. It's essentially the story of this American family living I think, in Pittsburgh, and they need some help running the household, and so they hire a housekeeper, and the housekeeper turns out to be this 50, 60-year-old upper-class British guy who has this impressive resume, which include, like, his references include Winston Churchill. Like, he's the most English guy ever, and he basically becomes the housekeeper of this American family who is not used to having housekeepers, and two, is kind of a little bit of a mess, and Mr. Belvedere essentially cleans up after them in more ways than one. Basically, I had not seen an episode of this in like 25 years. I kind of vaguely remembered it as being fun, and I kind of stumbled onto it on YouTube, and I said, okay, let's watch an episode of this, see if this is any good. It's probably not. 80s sitcoms are very hit and miss. Many of them are not as good as you remember them from watching them at age 12. But this one actually was quite good. I watched like 5 or 6 episodes, and it's actually quite well done. As far as sitcoms go, especially from that time, it's pretty smart, and it's well written, and it was a good time.